Today we're gonna be eating as many pizzas as I can while the Spider-Man 2 pizza theme from Spider-Man 2 the game plays in the background. So I'm gonna eat as many pizzas as I can in 1 minute and 28 seconds. Okay, so we'll get started in 3, 2, 1.
Ultimate Spider-Man and the 2017 Spider-Man reboot, two shows considered by many to be the very worst cartoons to come from their franchise. These series were both produced by Marvel Animation Studios in the wake of Disney buying Marvel in 2009, having restructured the company, and put the TV animation rights for all of their characters under the control of one sole studio. This saw the end to a variety of series with different styles and creators that were common in the 2000s, and was a bit of a return to a lineup of similar shows that all fell under the same universe that Fox Kids did with its Marvel series in the 90s. With the rising popularity of the Marvel Cinematic Universe at the time, it's understandable that the animation studio would try to ride the coattails of the success with their animated projects on the small screen. At the same time, there had already been 7 different Spider-Man cartoons, each with their own styles and stories. After so many different incarnations so close to each other, it just became harder and harder to know where exactly you go from there. How do you make a show that represents the same characters and world that everyone knows, while still making them different enough to be their own thing, without alienating those loyal to the previous series, and also make the show marketable and easy enough to produce, while working underneath large businesses like Disney and Marvel? And they say making a reboot is easy. I won't be giving these series the benefit of the doubt, however. As recent as they may be, I won't be treating them any differently from the other 2 Spider-Man series that I've already reviewed. Once again, I've only seen 26 episodes of each series. That means I've only seen 1 full season of both, and it puts them on an even playing field. Additionally, after I put all my thoughts on these 2 out there, I'll be giving my final rankings for each Spider-Man show that I've covered here and say my final words about them. But before that, let's end our look through nearly 25 years of animated history with the worst Spider-Man cartoons.
Okay. So, in 1 minute and 28 seconds, I was able to eat 1.5 pieces of pizza. So that's pretty good.
Alright, let's now take a look at... You're probably wondering why I'm using this whole joke. Well, there's a good reason for that. This joke here, this is literally Ultimate Spider-Man. I understand that after a couple of shows that covered similar ground, Disney and Marvel would decide to go into a different direction with this series, as here we see Spider-Man lead his own team of superheroes as he trains under S.H.I.E.L.D. to become a real Avenger. This gets us out of the usual comfort zone that Spider-Man shows fall into, and allows us to see villains and worlds different from what we're used to, without completely abandoning what we already know. In theory, this should be the Spider-Man equivalent to Batman the Brave and the Bold, just a fun show that plays around in the Marvel Universe. But in practice, Ultimate Spider-Man tears down what potential its premise could have had due to its execution and unwillingness to take major risks. Every so often in the series, Spider-Man will stop the action and break the fourth wall to comment on a situation directly to the viewer, or reinterpret a scene with a funny skit. When I say every so often, I really mean every couple of minutes in an episode.
I just want to say for the record, they haven't invented a word for how cool this armor is. So, I'll invent one right now. Iron Spider armor is swickety-autastic. And now, back to the battle.
Not only do these moments break any sense of flow in the story, but these are very in-your-face and trying too hard to get a laugh. This makes the series feel like Family Guy's take on Spider-Man. I wish I was joking about that, but the similarities are quite clear. Deadpool might have the same shtick, but his humor is much more self-aware, and when done well, it works with the tone and pacing rather than against it. Spider-Man just assumes what the viewer thinks of every joke he makes, and almost always tries to defend himself, creating a character that almost operates on the logic of a preschool series protagonist.
Sweet ride, right? You must be asking, why is Peter Parker's self-styled science geek / superhero hanging in the back of a long black limo?
Actually, I was not asking, thank you very much. The fourth wall breaks pander to the lowest denominator, with lots of crazy random humor and video game references that are vague enough to feel like ones that were written by people who haven't touched a video game in decades. Though as silly as they are, these moments are the only ones where the art style is something besides generic. In general, this show just kind of looks fine. Some of the lighting doesn't always fit the mood of the setting, like the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier looks a bit too drab to be the hero's headquarters, but some of the action scenes look very excellent, and they can get chaotic when the whole team fights together. The art style is somewhat bland, but it does a decent enough job emulating the look of the Ultimate Series comics that many designs take inspiration from. I can't really knock a Spider-Man show for trying to look like a comic book, but I feel that by doing that, the art design looks more generic than it could have been. Anyway, the fourth wall breaks may have attempted to get inside Peter's head without resorting to the long monologues that the Spider-Man franchise is kind of notorious for. But this ends up making Peter Parker and Spider-Man feel like the same character, since they react to everything the same way. For how much he devours the series, you're going to hate Peter's shrill voice performance by Drake Bell and stupid haircut that makes him look like he's about to storm into a hospital to visit his wife. This storytelling even becomes a bit of a narrative crutch, as sometimes it's even used to explain very basic character motivations that anyone even remotely familiar with the character will already know.
I could in fact dodge this ball, but I choose not to, in order to protect my identity and thus all the kids in this school. Even King Jerk Flash Thompson, who has it all, but still thinks he has to get one up on me.
Spider-Man's character is further ruined by the show's indecisiveness of what it should be about. Half the time it's focusing on Spider-Man's team going on a mission for S.H.I.E.L.D., and other times Spidey is all by his lonesome or teaming up with an Avenger against a new threat. All the typical Spider-Man characters like Aunt May, MJ, Harry, and Norman Osborn are all present and accounted for, and the show has to make room for them and for a variation on the Venom plot along with that. Most of the episodes in the series barely amount to anything in terms of moving the overall plot along. Half the time Spidey's teammates feel like extra baggage rather than actual characters in their own right. After a whole season, we don't even know much about who Iron Fist, Power Man, Nova, and White Tiger are, and why we should care about them. And Spider-Man himself gets very little long-lasting development throughout his different adventures. Besides one of them occasionally giving Spider-Man some kind of boost, you could write the teammates out of the show pretty easily. There's a big tonal issue created when we put episodes where Spider-Man is turned into a pig or switches bodies with Wolverine next to ones with the franchise's typical plot threads of Peter trying to protect his world from the serious danger that he puts it in. By the time we get to the more dramatic final batch of episodes, Ultimate Spider-Man starts to feel like it's two different shows with two different tones, as the majority of silly comedic elements only serve to undermine the darker story that it's slowly trying to tell. The use of characters from the extended Marvel Universe also grinds episodes to a halt so that they can be introduced in the most exposition-heavy way possible. Practically introducing a new protagonist in each episode doesn't leave a ton of room for them to make an impression. So sometimes we get heroes like Captain America, who is brilliantly brought to life by a nice performance by Roger Craig Smith, and other times we get the Hulk, who is lacking the Bruce Banner double life that really makes him interesting. The positive to come from this sheer lack of focus is that the series is filled with variety, especially in terms of the villains. As finally, we have a Spidey show that goes far beyond his classic rogues gallery, even beyond what Spectacular did, and can pick and choose the enemies that our heroes put up against. Many of them are written just as simplistically as the heroes, and for whatever reason, their go-to villain is the Trapster, who shoots sticky glue that traps people. That's all he does. I have absolutely no idea why this character has yet to make the jump to the big screen. Of all the villains, Venom and Dr. Octopus stuck out the most, each for how different their interpretations differ in quality and from most of their other adaptations. Venom isn't an alien symbiote, but instead an artificial creature created from Spider-Man's DNA. Eddie Brock is nowhere to be found in the series, and instead he attaches himself to Harry. I guess they were attempting to streamline the storyline by cutting Eddie and the black suit stuff out, but it gets rid of all the buildup that I think helps Venom stand out as a character, without seeing Eddie's hatred for Peter grow over time, only for it to be combined with the strength of the symbiote. Venom is just a boring thug, and swapping Eddie out for Harry doesn't do anything to make him more interesting. Harry is just given power that he can't control, and it changes the core of the Venom story arc, making the story much more by the numbers. Doc Ock, on the other hand, or should I say the other tentacle, is super unique compared to his other counterparts, but in a good way. He's this twisted, broken man that can't move without the use of the machines melded to his body. The Doctor's been practically enslaved by Norman Osborn, and pulls a lot of strings throughout Season 1. And by that I mean he just kind of hides away in Osborn's glorified basement until he's needed, and also just so happens to have a connection with every single villain in the city. It's kind of lame that he's taken down simply because his breathing device is out in the open, causing his defeat by Spider-Man to be caused by suffocating, but otherwise Dr. Octopus is a pretty big highlight of the series, especially coupled with the chilling voice performance that Tom Kenny gives him.
I never understood the joy of hunting down another living creature, but you have taught me.
Speaking of the voice acting, some of it is really unique for what the series is. On top of usual voice acting talent, they actually got J.K. Simmons to reprise his role as J. Jonah Jameson. In Season 1, he only appears from time to time to yell at Spider-Man through TV, but his inclusion really helps to improve any scene he happens to show up in. Same goes with Stan Lee, who actually has not a cameo, but a full role as supporting character Stan the Janitor. He doesn't actually do too much in Season 1, but I really hope that it got more of a spotlight put on him later down the road. For the more mainstream Marvel characters, many designs and character personalities are modeled after their live-action counterparts in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Of course, they couldn't get the likes of Samuel L. Jackson, Robert Downey Jr., and the Chris's to voice their animated roles, but they did get Clark Gregg to play Agent Coulson again. They turned him into the principal of Peter's high school, and he ends up being such a fun and silly character, with his best moment being in the episode where he helps to produce a school musical about Spider-Man. The musical turns out about as well as you think a musical about Spider-Man would be.
I will save you all by crawling up your wall and spinning you a web that will not let you fall. I'm Spider-Man, I Spider-Am, I am Spider-Man.
A frightening onstage accident last night for the Broadway musical Spider-Man. In the show's final scene, an actor plummeted 30 feet to the ground, and the show has been plagued by problems in its first months of production.
Honestly, I like the Electro Company's take on this episode concept a lot better.
Who stole the show? Good question, Spidey.
Ultimate Spider-Man had a lot of fresh and creative ideas, but many of them were muddled by being poorly implemented and by a tendency to stick to the tropes of the franchise. I have no idea how the show fared in the other 78 episodes that I didn't watch, outside of having an epic crossover with Jesse that gives Infinity War a run for its money, but the first season either irritated me or bored me, since it lacked any strong characters or a consistent plot that I could get attached to. Half the time it felt like they were just introducing stuff so they can make it into toys. And yeah, I know that this has been a part of every Spider-Man cartoon that I've covered, but this series felt like a blatant advertisement more than the others. Like we really didn't need an extended sequence in one of the first episodes where Spider-Man shows off his motorcycle, even though we know he doesn't need a motorcycle because he can just swing around, and why does he have a motorcycle? I know that I'm far from the demographic that the series was aimed for, but it did a poor job treating its audience with respect, and more often than not, felt like baby's first superhero show. I give Ultimate Spider-Man a score of 5.5 out of 10. It looks like a Spider-Man show, but by trying to be way more than just a Spider-Man show, and not really getting the character at all, it becomes a below average experience to watch. I do applaud the team behind it for actually trying something new here, even if the final product really wasn't for me. Honestly, it's a bit of a shame that Ultimate Spider-Man wasn't a bigger hit. If that were the case, then it probably wouldn't have prompted Marvel to go into a much safer direction with their next and most recent Spider-Man series. And on that note, let's move on to something that I've been waiting a very long time to talk about again. So back when it was new, I reviewed Marvel's Spider-Man and I wasn't much of a fan. If you didn't see it, my review went a little something like this.
He's a menace to the entire city! I want that wall-crawling arachnid prosecuted! I want him strung up by his web!
From what I saw in that first batch of episodes, I still stand by what I said. I might have been a little nitpicky and could have explained some of my points a bit better, but I still think the series was very bland and poorly put together in many ways. But now that a whole season and then some has been released, let's see how much my opinions have changed, or if I still think this is the worst Spider-Man series of recent memory. So the last 3/4 of episodes include some pretty major events that shake up the show in one way or another, though I find quite a few of these to be very underwhelming. Spider-Man has barely gotten any development before Miles Morales gets bitten by a different radioactive spider on the side of a street. Not in a high-tech lab or anything, it's just in the middle of a city. Soon, he becomes Kid Arachnid, and it's cool to see Miles get some more animated love, but it sidetracks the show from focusing on its other major conflicts. Miles' transformation just occurs with very little fanfare, and it feels like they've skipped a few beats in his character arc. Prior to the episode, he barely has any defining character traits. Every major character and villain feels like they've been treated the same way, and it makes many of the series' story arcs seem unnecessarily rushed. Just 2 episodes after his transformation, Miles falls to the sidelines and barely does anything of note, besides helping Spidey on a few small missions. It begs the question why he was even introduced at this time, and this is the start to one of the season's biggest problems. But before that, we get a few more standalone episodes. A few of these feature heroes like Iron Man and Hulk, and their appearances are used to further certain plots, rather than stop them in their tracks. We get our now obligatory telling of the Venom plotline, this time complete with the black suit stuff, though it just feels like it's going through the motions. Peter doesn't even get more aggressive when the symbiote starts to attach itself to Peter's suit. Peter just makes a mistake that he probably would have made without the suit anyway, and starts to act like a self-obsessed hipster. Not a funny hipster like the one seen in the greatest moment in cinematic history, but just a pathetic and annoying one. Eddie Brock is once again nowhere to be seen, and other characters become Venom without any sort of repercussions or personality changes. The arc is left semi-unresolved, and it appears that they may be saving Brock for season 2, but I see no reason to split things up like this, especially since it seems like because of this change, Brock's connection with Peter is going to end up being a lot weaker than it could have. Another episode with a good concept, but a disappointing execution, was the Sinister Six episode at the end of the season. Now the whole fun of having half a dozen of Spider-Man's foes gathered together is to see them work together, to see them bounce off of each other, and see how Spidey is able to outsmart them all at once. But in the episode, each member takes Spider-Man on one by one, and it feels like they weren't working together at all until the very end. I get that they were trying to do something different from other Sinister Six episodes, like they also include a subplot about Dr. Octopus trying to wear Spider-Man down so he can mind control him, and that subplot kind of works, but if you're going to do a Sinister Six episode, you need to make it count, and really take advantage of the fact that it's a big villain team-up, and on that front, the episode was another letdown. Right after the midpoint of the season, we get the episode Screwball Live. It's pretty bad, but in a way, it's kind of one of my favorite episodes. It tackles internet culture by having Spider-Man go up against Screwball, known from the comics as the world's first live-streaming supervillain. Huh, I thought that title belonged to Keemstar. The episode tries to spread a message to the younger generation about trying to make a difference with their work and think about what they put online, but it comes off as laughable for the implications that it has.
Value your story. Nowadays, anyone, anywhere can have an audience of millions. But being seen by those people isn't the same as reaching them. A real writer doesn't care about getting likes. They care about making a difference, whether it's for 100,000 people or just one.
I'm not quite sure how this episode was really making a difference. You could ask the same about me, and argue that the videos I've made haven't made much of a difference either. But if they've kept you away from the show, then I think I've done what I've set out to do. Elsewhere in the episode, Spider-Man goes up against the Absorbing Man, who has the power to absorb anything that he touches. So what does he use this ability for? To grow big and to swing around a wrecking ball. Real creative use of a character's superpower. Screwball also turns out to be Peter's old classmate, Liz, because there can't be any average characters in the show. The only typical dude outside of Aunt May is Randy Robinson. I feel bad for him. His only superpower is writing a blog that no one reads, and that's even lamer than being able to absorb the raw power of tortilla chips. Randy could have been a good character to cast in the role of the straight man, but this is only one of his 2 major appearances in the show so far. It's always good to have a straight man in any type of superhero show that can bring the action and adventure back to Earth and keep things on a more relatable level. Say what you will about Ned in Spider-Man Homecoming being an annoying or unoriginal character, but he and Peter's other friends in the film helped the world seem more realistic, as we had kids that felt like real, regular kids. Not kids that all feel like some sort of variation on Jimmy Neutron. As it turns out, I was pretty spot on with my predictions about the direction that they would take most of the major characters, because everyone is either a mastermind working behind the scenes, an established Marvel character, or a Spider-Man. I mean, he's Spider-Man, he's Spider-Man, she's Spider-Man, she's Spider-Man. Are there any other Spider-Man I need to know about? This guy from a Best Buy commercial? How's he Spider-Man?
Aha! Spider-Man! What's cracking, baby? Woo! Hey! Where you going, Spider-Man? getting the girl, saving the day. Yeah, go Spider-Man!
I stand corrected. Next up is the rise of Dr. Octopus, and man does it take a long time for this guy to rise. The arc goes on for 4 episodes, and Doc Ock is hardly in half of them. I like parts of this arc, like Peter and Miles trying to form an alliance with the Doctor, a great appearance by the Lizard, real development between Peter and Harry, and most importantly, another appearance by my boy, Bernie Sanders, the cab driver. But when I watched this arc, it brought light to a big problem, and it's the series' tendency to get very sidetracked in the middle of storylines. I'm not saying that you can't have episodes with more than one plot, that's what B-plots are for. But with a story-driven show like this, the side plots only serve to waste time that could be spent with the main plot. The same goes for the painfully long Spider Island arc, which is based off the storyline from the comics. Again, great stuff here, like the simple imagery of people swinging around New York like Spider-Man and seeing it covered in thick webbing later on. But did we really need to introduce S.H.I.E.L.D. and bring back Kraven in the middle of this? Both of these elements take up about an episode each, and by episode 3 I had completely checked out. They really milked this arc for too long, and it's a shame considering how cool the premise was and how easily it could have been fixed. But let's swing over to some positives for a moment. The relationship between Peter and Harry is the only thing that kept me a little interested throughout the later episodes. Prior to this show, the bond between these two has never been a major focus of a Spider-Man adaptation. So seeing all the ups and downs they go through, and how they still stay at each other's sides throughout it all is very new and charming. Peter also reveals his secret identity to Harry during the climax of Spider Island, and going back to it, it's a really good moment that is properly built up to. And I like how it doesn't immediately lead to Peter and Harry turning on each other, and instead their friendship gains some newfound respect. Focusing on one element and making it the best it can be was one of the things that Spectacular Spider-Man did best, and I wish that the show did that more instead of giving a story we all know straight to us with little changes. Coincidentally, the season finale is nearly a carbon copy of the series finale of Spectacular, with a slightly different setup, but the same twist and conclusion. I don't care if they were both trying to adapt the same story. I knew what was going to happen before the end of Act 1. And no matter what kind of show this is, that's still a problem. Not every quality of Marvel Spider-Man was consistent throughout the entire run of Season 1. There's a few small changes that I feel the need to comment on, but first I'll elaborate on the voice cast, which is something I failed to do during my first look. I didn't mention it back then because it's fine. I don't have much to say about it. Getting the guy who played Sway on Breadwinners to play the title character was actually a pretty good idea, since he gives a solid performance with what he's given to say. It's also really cool that Josh Keaton, who voiced Peter in Spectacular Spider-Man, is now voicing Norman Osborn. It's great to see that he's got range as an actor, but I didn't really think that his, or any of the other performances here really stood out, even with John DiMaggio in the cast playing the Jackal. I chalk this issue up to most of the voice talent having just decent voice direction. Typically, that's the deciding factor on the quality of voice acting in animation, and I hope that it can be improved in the future, since the foundation is here for some solid performances. I went on a small rant about the quality of the animation being very low and unpolished, but over time it's gotten a little better. The use of CGI has become less frequent, and the compositing has improved a lot, the lighting has gotten more dynamic, and some of the action has gotten a bit faster. The art direction, on the other hand, is still very bland and unappealing. People always complain when reboots of action shows redesign their characters to simplify them and make them easier to animate. But would you rather that they look like they have no identity of their own? You could change basically nothing about most of these character designs, and they could be dropped into many other shows with ease. Besides that, the color and shading on the characters and everything else is very poor. Half the time the palette looks very muddy and unappealing. I still see walls and objects that are purely solid colors, and the characters appear to look ripped straight out of the old Ben 10 series. They suck so much fun and energy out of many of the suit designs, giving them bland color palettes and unnecessary details, like a third eye on top of Doc Ock's visor. If you ask someone to name most of the human characters just by their design, they probably wouldn't be able to do it, since hardly any of their personalities can be detected through their looks. There's also an abundance of animation shortcuts and errors that became easier to spot as the episodes went on. Unlike the other series, where Peter's spider sense is indicated through a wild visual or audio cue, it's represented here by a slow zoom that can be imitated in Windows Movie Maker. I know that these are small things, nitpicky things, and they probably don't matter to you, But for me, these are some of the only things of note that the show really has to offer. Marvel's Spider-Man is as by the numbers as you can get, and that makes the little hiccups in the production stick out a whole lot more. It makes it harder to enjoy the show for what it is, and instead of getting into the characters and their stories, I only notice the small visual and story flaws that I've found. For instance, the whole Spider Island arc is kicked off by Peter and Miles chasing a mysterious villain who has stolen Peter's stealth suit. Now, the episode has probably the best fight scene in the whole series, since it's the only one that I think is really memorable. It's set on top of the Statue of Liberty, and you got all the heroes jumping and swinging around. It's good stuff, but it's all undermined by the ending of the episode. Before Spider-Man can do a Scooby-Doo style unmasking, the villain mutates into a giant spider, and we never hear from him again. So we don't know what he was, why he wanted to steal the suit, or how he even knew the suit was in Peter's bag when he grabbed it. Then there's something that I'm really surprised slipped through. Marvel Spider-Man has a little continuity between each episode, and this implies that the flow of time must be linear. So why does the episode after Halloween Moon, which obviously takes place on Halloween, open like this?
This heat wave is killing me.
Why is there a heat wave in New York City in November? This show still gets a 3 out of 10. Whenever I try to give a show a general score, I'm usually reminded of a few strong positives before I finalize it for each video. I've tried really hard to keep the positives in mind when scoring this reboot, but the more I think about it, the more I find to complain about. It was hard to even find specific clips to help me back up the good things I even had to say, even after going through a dozen different episodes. I want it to succeed, I want it to get better, and maybe if it focuses more on the smaller character stuff and tries to make its art more stylized to work around its minuscule budget, we could have a great version of Spider-Man on our hands. But from just having seen Season 1, it's easily my least favorite thing that I've ever talked about on this channel to date. Well, I've just talked about Spider-Man for a long time, but now the question remains, how would I rank these 4 shows from best to worst? Well, it should come as a surprise to no one that the Spectacular Spider-Man leads the pack, as it's not just a great Spider-Man show, but a great show in general, one where high-quality visuals, audio, and story come together to create what might just be one of my favorite animated series ever. Next is Spider-Man the Animated Series, which is a little rough around the edges, but had its heart in the right place and told some pretty good stories with what it had. Now, this is where things get tricky, because there's very good reasons for both Ultimate Spider-Man and Marvel Spider-Man to take the bottom slot. I have to choose between a series with good ideas that squanders its potential by trying to be too much at once and has an annoying presentation, and another that is bland, boring, and more interested in showing important moments rather than making those moments interesting. I asked my followers on Twitter to give their opinion on which show seemed to be the worst of the two, based off of short descriptions that kept each show anonymous, and the majority seemed to think that the bland and boring show was the worst one for being more of a waste of time and energy. I put a lot of thought into how I should rank these 2 shows, and I've decided to stick by a statement I made 10 months ago. Marvel Spider-Man 2017 is still the worst Spider-Man cartoon. Ultimate is just more creative and interesting, despite it all being filtered through a slightly annoying protagonist. The reboot is more fun to watch, but only ironically. The whole show is running on empty, trying to crank out whatever it can as fast as it can, regardless of how good it might look or play out. A few things certainly work, and I know that there are some talented people behind it, but it's surrounded by a mountain of poorly executed concepts. If you still don't feel the way that I do about this topic, then you probably haven't been looking at all the clips I've been showing. But more importantly, the absolutely real main reason why Ultimate is better is because it has a better Flash Thompson. Besides that one episode where he helped Spider-Man by using advice that Peter had already given him, what did Reboot Flash do besides just stand around? I mean, Ultimate Spider-Man Flash has a fantastic singing voice. He's really got that going for him.
I will save you all by crawling up your wall and spinning you a web that will not let you fall. I'm Spider-Man. I am Spider-Man.
If Flash from Spectacular Spider-Man is the ultimate Chad, then this Flash is the ultimate virgin. I don't think anyone can argue with me here. So I've just gone through about 104 episodes of Spider-Man cartoons for these 2 videos, and it's been quite an interesting experience with plenty of ups, downs, and different Stan Lee cameos. I didn't grow up with any of these series or have any attachment to them before watching them for this video, but I understand why some people hold them in such high regard. To many, one of these 4 series is Spider-Man to them, and that is a testament to the power that each show has had on the Spidey franchise. They may not all be important or good pieces of animation history, but they offered people an escape into a world that they previously only knew on paper. Ones which captured one of the biggest icons in pop culture history. For that reason, this is far from the end of Spider-Man's animated career. No matter how dull his current TV cartoon may be, Marvel is still going to be reintroducing this character in every medium imaginable every few years, especially in live action. In less than half a year, we'll even have Into the Spider-Verse, the kind of animated Spider-Man project that Disney really should be taking notes from. It's not retreading the same ground for the 4th time, or making stories as dull and sterile as possible. So far, this film looks to have a fresh new perspective on the franchise. It's got fan service that doesn't feel forced, and is willing to be a little darker than your average kids film, at least as far as we know right now. This may also be one of the most visually unique CGI animated films I've ever seen. The smears, the movement, the 3D depth effect, the lighting and framing that emulates the look of a comic book, it looks amazing, and shows that the future could be very bright for the animated adventures of our favorite web-slinger. Even if Marvel's Spider-Man will probably get 2 more seasons for no actual reason. Wait, Marvel is revamping their TV animation department? It's most likely been canceled? There is still hope out there!
I finally got to him! The power of the press triumphed!